In talking about your family, I was very taken aback by your half-brother Michael's response to your book. Were you?
Well, I probably wasn't as surprised as I should have been, but yeah. I suppose I owe him a thank you note for so enthusiastically promoting my book.
By the way, it opened number 13 on the New York Times bestsellers list.
He probably would have done better to have read it before he began talking about it, but he didn't. I think some of the confusion, the controversy, as I'm sure you well know, is it surrounds Alzheimer's and the presidency and whether he in fact had the disease while he was president. I make a couple of observations in the book. There's very little in the book about this, but it is there. Two things I say. I noticed, midway through his 2 terms as president, I began to notice occasionally little somethings that I couldn't quite explain. Now, you got to remember he was the oldest president ever elected at the time. He was in his mid-70s by that time. He was losing his hearing and did not like to wear hearing aids. And he'd been shot and nearly killed, which will take a little of the wind out of your sails. So I don't apply the name Alzheimer's to my worry in the book, and I didn't think about it that way when I was worrying about him. I was just worried. He's in this terribly stressful job. He's 70-some-odd years old, and you're thinking, geez, this is tough. The one incident that I cite there is the first Mondale debate in 1984, where he really obviously had a bad night. I don't know why he had a bad night, and I don't offer, Alzheimer's as an explanation for that, but something was off for him. And immediately everybody began to talk about, well, he's too old, he's lost a step, we can't elect people to the presidency this old, and
but the next debate,
he comes back and cleans
back.
house.
Right.
Yeah, I was actually there for that one. I determined to go to that one because I was worried about him. I thought, he can't have another bad night like that. That's really going to damage his prospects. And even though I was a liberal and probably would have voted for Mondale if it was, if my father wasn't my father, he was my father. And I'm damned if I'm voting for anybody else. He's my dad. Of course I'm supporting him, and I figure I can change his mind once he gets back into the White House. I can work on him. I've got an in there. So he was back. The other thing I say, which I think has probably been even more misinterpreted, is that given when he was diagnosed, a few years out of office, and given what we now know, didn't know then, but now know about Alzheimer's disease, which is that it is a process which unfolds for years, even we now believe decades, before actual symptoms arise, diagnosable symptoms arise, that it is likely that the disease was present in him while he was president. Now, I think some people confuse Alzheimer's, the disease, and dementia, a symptom of later stage Alzheimer's. I mentioned in the book that I didn't see any dementia-like symptoms in him when he was president. But some people hear Alzheimer's and they just think dementia. So they think that what I'm saying is he was suffering from dementia, likely suffering from dementia in the White House, and that's just not what I say. And I don't think that this deduction that the disease was probably present in him, and I've talked to doctors about this who have concurred that is, given what we know, that virtually must be the case. That gets misunderstood and misinterpreted.
Were you surprised by the furor that this misinterpretation created?
A little bit. I mean, when I understood that Mike had come out and said what he had said, I understood, because having worked in news organizations before and on television and all.
It seemed like taking sibling rivalry to a new level.
Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah, Mike sometimes bears his Freudian soul, in ways that I don't think he realizes. But, I understood that there would be some reaction to this. The level of it kind of surprised me. But once an organization has a news hook, they're going to run with it, and they're not going to let it go, as I've discovered. I've spent the last week and a half explaining to people that I really didn't write what you're telling me I did, and asking them to show it to me in the book. Well, of course they can't. At one point I was being told that I had I had posited this this brain surgery that he had had at some point. He had one procedure in 1989 after he was thrown from a horse, and this was the first
Right. That's when it was
inkling
first,
that
the doctor
he
said.
might have Alzheimer's.
Right.
They suspected there might be Alzheimer's there. Thrown from a horse in Mexico, July 4th, 1989. He makes 2 medical stops, one in Tucson, which I mistakenly refer to as San Diego in the book. Who doesn't fact-check cities? Cuff me about the head and shoulders. We caught it too late after it went to the printer. But anyway, Tucson, they kind of patch him up a little, but then 2 months later goes to the Mayo Clinic, and they burr a hole in the skull, when they need to relieve the pressure of fluid that is built up from a blow to the head. That's the only surgery that I mention in the book, but somehow I was being told that I had written about some other surgery, and I'd say, where?